I'm going to introduce you, even though I know I introduced you on the last video. I'm going to say this, and thanks again to Jared Hassan for Shrine for the Black Madonna, aka also World Eater Studios. He helped us get to where we are now, and now we're here. So I'm going to introduce our guest, Bevis Griffin, aka the Black Rock Maverick of Texas. First Black glam rock star, drummer, vocalist, arranger, composer. 1998 was honored by the city of Austin as a musician of cultural significance by Mayor Kirk Watson for 25 years of his contribution to music. He was also inducted into the Texas Museum in 2010, and in the early 2020s featured in an anniversary 40th issue of the Texas Music Museum magazine, and the founder of Devoy Limited Artist Development, managing bands like Death, Living Color, and Andre Simone. He's one of the founders of the Black Rock Coalition. He's an Austin artist. Austin Artist Foundation dedicated to Black History Month. 28 days of Bevis, and that was a whole cool event. And then he's also involved in School of Rock, Deep Roots of Rock music program. Vernon Reed from Living Color said about Bevis, he is integral to the dawn of Austin's modern ascendancy into the ranks of the world's greatest music cities, back when the Armadillo world headquarters had barely even opened, and people like Stevie Ray Vaughan were barely even known. So, man, that's my introduction. I hope it was cool. If I missed something, I'm sorry. It's a lot. I could have said more.
Brother, I'm blessed and honored to be with you. I mean, you're such a loyal soldier, love warrior, truth teller, and, basically holding us up by holding us down. You dig what I mean? So I love young blood that's inspired, and anything I can do to kind of feed your flame, I consider it a privilege, okay? So bless your life, and let's get it popping, okay?
Thanks. Well, today I want to talk about your bands, because we left off, and that's where we left off on that, and I wanted to bring up the bands, and especially the earlier stuff. Bands that you've been in: Franklin's Mask, Fools, Dirty Tricks, Skyscrapers, Violators, The Bats Who Became Bonsai Kick, The Shades, Chill Factor, Rawhead, Tex, Spy vs. Spy, Solid Cinders, Cosmopolitans, One Fell Swoop, Papa Molly, The Instigators, R.C. Banks, and The Paradigm, Bevis and the Painkillers, and oh my gosh, how could I write this thing down? Oh man, I think it's oh man, I messed up. Sorry. Dino Lee and the Love Johnson.
Yeah, Dino Lee and the Love Johnson. That's my man.
So I wanted to ask this question. Franklin's Mass, from what I've read about it, was you mentioned on the last interview how the Jimi Hendrix Experience basically influenced a lot, because there's a lot of blues players in Texas, but it influenced the whole power trio thing in Texas. I think there's certain groups that came out of that, and it seemed, because Franklin's Mass, it seems like you guys were a part of that. Well, I'm curious,
yeah, let me help put it in context for you, and I can tell you what I can about Franklin's Mass, because we were special insofar as that we were multiracial, and being multicultural, we really, had zero fucks about what anybody thought about us, because we didn't have any sort of precedent. Like, there wasn't any sort of roadmap, for us to gauge our trajectory. We were young, energetic, and just determined to make noise. But to put things in a time frame with regard to the three-piece presentation, you have to go all the way back to '66 with Cream, because they really kind of lit the fuse that showed how much power could be exhibited in a three-piece format, having really high caliber musicianship unbridled by a pop format, right? That was why they were so significant and so impactful. By the time Hendrix got to London, Eric Clapton was already like considered God,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it was graffiti that you could find all around London. He had made such a big impact on the scene. But without burning up too much peripheral context, what happened was when Hendrix exploded with Are You Experienced, and by the time he got stateside, 67 going into 68, Johnny Winter had a band called the Progressive Blues Experiment
Mm.
with his brother Edgar Winter, who later broke, of course, and the original bass player Tommy Shannon, who was the bass player with Stevie Ray and Double Trouble later, right? Tommy was the core bass player along with Uncle John Turner. They formed a three-piece format, essentially inspired by Hendrix. When Hendrix came stateside, they saw just how, visceral and and dynamic and powerful it could be, and so they kind of lit the fuse there. And then, a year or so later, obviously Billy Gibbons, who had toured with the Hendrix Experience briefly with his group, the Moving Sidewalks from Houston, on the backside of that, he decided he wanted to have a three-piece format because this opened up so much more expressive space for guitar players, right? It's like you didn't necessarily need a keyboard player. You didn't need to drag a Farfisa or a Hammond B3 around. You know what I'm saying? It was just more economical, first of all. And of course, if you really did have uh, if you really did have command of your instrument, it just gave you a lot more freedom to explore, right? So, having said that, we started to see bands filter down up to Wichita Falls, Texas, where I was in high school, and that's where I first saw inklings of some of the power bands out of Austin, like Cracker Jack, and there was a group called Texas, and there was a group called um, Phoenix, and these bands were lit, like they were really what I call a step above your so-called high school band fare. You know what I mean? Wichita Falls was such a small town, and everything was basically coming through filters of Dallas, Fort Worth, or Houston, which had a lot more, let's say, musical integrity, so to speak. But to put things in context, you couldn't just fall into nightclub circuits without an agent, and you couldn't get an agent without a repertoire. So what was good about Franklin's Mass was our lead guitar player, Jimmy Siraj, was actually a songwriter. He was interested in writing songs out the gate. So he had, a pocket full of originals that we could, compress with what we call reinventions or iterations of rock and roll and blues standards, which was kind of like the playbook of the late 60s and early 70s. All of the powerful, dynamic, quote unquote, hard rock, progressive blues bands out of England, like it's important to note, like Fleetwood Mac, the early Fleetwood Mac with Peter Green.
Yeah.
Peter Green is a guy, that was the band that wrote Black Magic Woman that Santana covered in
Yeah,
1999.
you told me that on the last one. I had no idea about that. And I
Yeah.
knew about Peter Green, but I didn't know he wrote that
No,
originally.
well, Fleetwood Mac was a dynamic, soulful, hard rock band in their onset, right? It's basically the same rhythm section that became, the famous Fleetwood Mac with
Nick from
Stevie
Buckingham.
Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham in the 70s. But in the 60s, they were hard, they were heavy, right? They had the same tone that ZZ Top came up with. When you listen to the first couple of ZZ Top albums, they were influenced by Fleetwood Mac, and Billy Gibbons would tell you that.
Awesome.
So my point is that sound was really contagious all throughout the state of Texas for guitar players, right? But the thing that kind of put Texas, let's say, in a different lane or in a different vibe was that we still had like vibrant blues players like Freddie King was like active on the scene. Like Freddie King was strong and active on the same scene when ZZ Top were coming on the scene. So it wasn't like they were front, you know what I mean? Like they knew what the real deal as far as Texas blues was all about because Freddie King was representing like big time. You feel me?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so having that and having a lot of the Delta cats like Mance Lipscomb, Lightning Hopkins. Lightning Hopkins was in and around Austin all the time because of the Armadillo World headquarters. Armadillo was a really interesting venue because it was eclectic, like the Fillmore West or the Fillmore East, where they put blues and progressive rock and progressive jazz in some cases on the same bill.
Wow.
Right? We had like Ornette Coleman out of Fort Worth, right?
Yeah, he's from Texas.
He's out of Fort Worth. He would come and play a set against somebody like Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention.
Sick. I would have loved to see that, man.
Yeah. So as a kid, and I say a kid, because I hit the scene roughly 18, 19 was when I started to get my wings, so to speak. I was still green as a pool table, but I just wanted to do it with so much flavor and flair, right, that I had started dressing the part before I even had my chops.
Wow.
Right? And that's the thing that kind of enabled me to move into the inner circle of the veteran players because I kind of had this little swag like a wolf in sheep's clothing. You know what I mean?
Man.
And I put the chops together on the back end of getting into the scene, right? Because it's literally learning by osmosis. It's not like young bloods today have all this advantage, in my opinion, because you've got all of this information that's just available on your phone, right? I mean, you can get into YouTube and you can get into history like rapid, and you can go deep with it. If you want to know about reggae, if you want to know about bebop, if you want to know about electronic music, you can just follow the breadcrumbs, right? Because it's all been documented. But you got to flip that. In the late 60s, early 70s, there wasn't any sort of what I call, panoply of index of information. There was no compendium, no shortcuts, right? Everybody's flying by the seat of their pants, and it's just like that movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Music was exploding like that, right? Like where you had James Brown, Sly and the Family Stone, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, Jimi Hendrix, right? Then here comes Santana, here comes Led Zeppelin, here, you know what I'm saying? And all these things are just like, they're popping up like mushrooms, right? You go into a record store and you literally were just shopping by how cool an album cover was. You didn't have to really know, what the music was. It's, you could just essentially become intrigued because the relationship between graphic art and musical art were synonymous, right? And it was coded. It was like the cooler the album cover, it's like 9 out of 10 times the music was cool, right? Sometimes you get psyched, right? It wasn't like always great. But my point is, you didn't have to have what I call like a top 10 thumbs up from some big music critic to get into music, right? Because vinyl was prolific. There was so much vinyl, and as I said, and records were relatively inexpensive back in those days, right? You could get an album for like $3.99,
Man.
Or you got to what we call the cutout bins, right? 99 cents, right? So I digress. What I'm saying was, Franklin's Mass had a lead guitarist that was also a songwriter, and he was also a thespian in high school. So he had like stage experience, stage presence, so to speak. And he was like a little petite guy, like, just a little over 5 feet. His name was Jimmy Siraj, but he looked like He looked cool. He looked like Jimmy Page.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And he had that energy like Angus Young from AC/DC, because
Man.
we were really kind of stoked up on bands like Grand Funk Railroad. You know, Grand Funk was like a big band before Kiss.
Great
Like
band.
they were like big deal before Kiss hit the scene, right? I'm talking about
Freaking
like a
Mark Turner, man.
no, they were badass for real, because they could play and sing, but they were very kinetic on stage. Like Mark Farner was an energetic
Yeah.
performer. So I use that as kind of like a uh, uh, an example of what we wanted to be in that league, as opposed to this what I call the shoegazers. You know, the shoegazers were kind of like the bands like the Allman Brothers. You know what I'm saying? Um, you know, Savoy Brown was actually a really good band that evolved into Foghat, which was kind of like a high energy band, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, you kind of had to pick a lane. And so that was the thing about rock. There's so many different, you know, flavors and dynamics and nuances to it, right? What people won't understand at face value is like the musicians had very broad, I'll say the musicians that I hung out with had very broad palettes of appreciation for, you know, acoustic music. People wouldn't know that I was into like Cat Stevens and Joni Mitchell and uh, you know, Celtic bands like Fotheringay or Steel Eye Span. You know, you listen to music with Irish roots, Scottish roots, right? Because it's just beautiful music, first of all. But the thing is, it's like, okay, well, you know, what's got the most swag, right? So the stuff that had the most swag was, we were always looking for something that had a black swagger to it, like a funk swagger to it, regardless of who was playing it and how it came across. That's the reason that Zeppelin made such a big impact, like when they came across, because John Bonham had that funky foot, you know
Yeah,
what
he
I
did.
mean? And they could play with that pocket, you know, and you know, there's this new documentary on Zeppelin that's out right now called "Becoming Led Zeppelin," and they go deeply into um, revealing how both John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page had extensive, not just studios experience, but arranging experience. Like they were serious musicians on the London commercial scene way before Jimmy Page even joined the
They
Yardbirds.
did
Like these
a
cats,
lot of stuff with Joe Meek. I know that for sure. And I like Joe Meek's stuff, you know. The producer
no,
Joe Meek.
these cats could write charts and sight read charts, because
Man.
they were doing, you know, what I call serious commercial music. When I talk about commercial music, I mean like the theme song from Goldfinger,
Yeah.
right? Like Bond soundtracks. Anyway, I'm digressing.
No,
What my
that's
point
it's all open.
is, these musicians, these musicians in England were serious about their business. They were serious about the business of making music, and because they were in a what I call a very synergetic uh, environment, right? Like London being a hotbed, the way that you would think about New Orleans or Memphis in the '60s. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like when you've got a lot of high caliber players in one community, right? It becomes a sink or swim type situation, because just like I said, when you're talking about these session musicians, you're talking about cats that had to like get it right the first time.
Yep.
So
Yep.
if you because they were back in those days, everybody was recording in real space and time, the same way as the classic jazz musicians, like the bebop musicians, right? All those sessions, there's no
Yeah.
overdubs. Like
Motown
you're
too.
in the
Yep.
Motown too. You're in the space and just hit it and quit it, you know, and get it down and keep it moving, right? So Austin had that sort of energy, meaning by the time I got to Austin in the early 70s, 72, there were maybe 12 bands in high circulation, right? But they were all good caliber, high quality musicians. But only maybe three of them really had what I call that extra sauce of showmanship. You know what I'm saying? That would distinguish a club band from a touring band. And so
Man.
Franklin's Mass always aspired to be a touring band, like right out the gate. And that's how we got into the mix, because we entered a battle of the bands. We only had 10 minutes to play whatever, two songs. We had to make an impression or get lost. And so we went in and we just did our thing, and we just happened to be in front of one of the principal booking agents in Central Texas, a guy named Charlie Hatchett, and he liked what we did, liked the way that we looked. And because we were so much younger than a lot of the bands that were more established, the band that I considered like my mentors was this group called Cracker Jack, which
That
was
was Winter's backing band, right?
the rhythm section from Winter started a new band after they got released from Johnny Winter, because their manager basically fired them because they all had developed drug problems,
Ooh.
and they wanted to try to preserve Johnny, you know what I'm saying, from going down the tubes. So those three, Johnny and Unc and Tommy had started out together essentially from scratch, right? Tommy would tell me stories that they were literally sleeping on sleeping bags the day before they were discovered by Steve Paul, and 2 weeks later they were living in a seven bedroom mansion in Connecticut, right? Because Johnny signed the biggest record deal in American history back in 1968.
Yeah, you were
The deal
telling me like there was a bidding war over him,
yeah,
right?
he signed a deal for 600,000 in 1968.
Sheesh.
Yeah, so the point being is that the people that were kind of spoon feeding me or kicking me had literally been to the mountaintop. They had they'd gone over the hill. You dig what I mean? Like they had been to Europe and Asia, and you know had rubbed shoulders with all the big stars. Like these people like knew Jimi Hendrix and they knew Janis Joplin and knew Jim Morrison and blah 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 blah, which made the whole thing tangible for me, right? Because I'm in the mix with a person that's done these things. So it kind of gave me just psychological encouragement that, if I just can stay with it, stay on the track, that there's a possibility that I could maybe one day get to a point to where, because I always wanted to play drums with Jimi Hendrix. That was kind of my
Man,
initial goal. But of course, he sadly died, in 1970, just as I was coming out of high school,
Lord have
right?
mercy. Yeah.
Anyway, that being said, Franklin's Mass had a lot of energy, a lot of innovation with regard to the musical presentation. Like it wasn't just a cover band, right? Like we were doing essentially what most of the progressive English groups were doing, which was just taking American rock standards and then putting extra juice and steroids in them. You know what I'm saying? And just doing interpretations of our own. And because I was, black, of course, naturally, I wanted to do things that had influence from James Brown or influences from Sly Stone or influences from Jimi Hendrix. The short story, though, was it was real important that we were kind of in our wheelhouse as opposed to being in somebody else's wheelhouse, because those lines would blur quite easily,
Mm.
right? So the thing that kind of set us apart, to kind of round out the question, was that I was fortunate because I caught wind of the British glam movement just at its inception, just as it was starting to boil, right? I was already hip to T-Rex. I was already hip to um, David Bowie from you know the album where he did uh, Space Oddity, right? But when he came up with the Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, that was like a paradigm shift.
Wow.
That's went to a completely different level of spectacular, right? Because he was bringing it like with this Broadway level of presentation that nobody had really seen before. The only thing that was in, I'll put it this way, the only thing that was even in the same spectrum of that would have been like what Alice Cooper was doing, except Alice hadn't broken that big yet, right? Like
Mm.
Alice broke big behind the David Bowie thing, right? And then Alice became like super big. You dig what I mean?
Yeah.
So when you start talking about glam rock, you're talking about like a period in time where it wasn't so much a sound as much as it was a look. And it was a situation where the artists were dealing with androgyny, meaning, you know, if you had the body type and the physique, right? Because I had like a 28-inch waist. So I could wear
A
clothes,
twig.
I could wear clothes my girlfriends could wear. And we always knew that the good girls had the more colorful clothing. You know what I'm saying? Especially in the 70s, right? The things with the butterfly wings, you know. Like when you see the way that Jimi Hendrix was dressing, he was really taking a lot of cues from what was happening in England with bands like the Rolling Stones in particular, right? And the Stones were like one of the first bands. People won't put two and two together right away, but they were one of the first bands to really flirt with that whole thing about androgyny.
Man.
And the reason was because they had really super hip women in their camp, you know, like Marianne Faithfull and then Anita Pallenberg. These are women that had like, you know, what I call culture from Italy and culture from Spain and culture from Germany and the way that the gypsies used to dress, right?
Yeah, I know
All
Danielle Luna used to
that
kick it
all
with them too.
it all kind of rolled. Well, Danielle Luna, yeah, she's from that Warhol camp, you know,
Yeah.
out of Manhattan. But what I'm saying was that whole eclectic, what I call kind of electric gypsy sort of look, right? That was essentially European streetwear,
Mm.
where cats were taking, you know, they'd wear more than one shirt. They'd wear like one they'd wear like like a long sleeve t-shirt, and then another shirt they would take it and then they would tie it up at the waist. So when you see Hendrix with the shirt like tied up at the waist, that's a European
Fuck.
fashion trend. You dig what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, of course, as Jimmy progressed and he actually found a personal designer, the cat that really started, you know, building like his wardrobe as he started making more and more money and could afford these things. Then, of course, he kind of went into another spectrum. But see, for me, he was glam before the glam rock movement. And that's what David Bowie is talking about when he's talking about, you know, the Ballad of Ziggy Stardust
He played
supposedly
it left
was an
hand.
homage to Jimi Hendrix.
Yep.
That song.
I totally get that. I'm a Bowie fan too, so
Yeah, you know what I'm saying. So
yeah.
my point is, you know, Hendrix wasn't heavy into the cosmetic aspect of it, but from the aspect of like fashion, he was the most glamorous. Well, I'll say he and Sly Stone in conjunction were like the two of the most glamorous rock stars
I could totally like
in the world. So
yeah, no, they
from
totally
my
were.
vantage point, right, I was already a fan of the Stones, and I was already a fan of, you know, everything that was happening in England. It was easier for me to kind of like adopt the influences from Jimmy and Sly, and not necessarily have to feel like I was pigeonholed to what you know the Stones or the Kinks or the Who were doing. But I'm clocking all of it, right? Because at the end of the day, clothes are just inanimate objects until you put them on. So that kind of put us under the spotlight, and people started vibing to it.
You guys went through some stuff though, and I some of the stories are funny, but at the same time, I'm like, man, I don't know what I would have done to where you actually have to start carrying nunchucks. So like, I mean, from what I've read, it was like there's a lot of like people like persecuting y'all for on some racial stuff and also on some homophobic type stuff too.
Yeah.
And you guys toured for a little bit, right? And I'm curious, like, what? Yeah, I got to hear more about that.
Well, Austin was super liberal, right? Super progressive. So inside the bubble of Austin, it was a safe haven, so to speak. But as we were touring, and we would have to go to, smaller hamlets in East Texas or West Texas, that's when the horns would come out. You know what I mean? Because you've got these cats that are just like ranchers. We used to call them goat ropers. You know what I mean? And
Goat rope.
no, no shade, but I mean, that sort of vernacular started like in high school, right? Because you think about high school caste systems, right? You got the jocks kind of like at the top of the food chain, right? And then beneath the jocks, you got some academics, some of the nerds, the bookworms or whatever, the kids that are super math nerds. You know what I mean? You got those kids. Then you got the art geeks. And I kind of fell in with the art geek kids in high school, but I never was into high school the way that kids were into school. I was never into school like that. My thing was school was just a gateway for me to get to freedom. You know what I mean?
Means to
So
an end.
having said all that, I started pushing that envelope very early on as far as trying to find self identity. And that was the thing that attracted me most about Jimmy and Sly was the fact that they seemed totally free and disassociated from the rigors of the civil rights movement or the boundaries that were being set, based on racial barriers in the general zeitgeist, right? They had seen a broken clear of all of that. So their self-expression was so vibrant. It was totally exciting to me. So I'm not sitting there thinking like, oh, well, that's a girl's shirt or that's a girl's vest or this, that, and the other thing. All I'm thinking is like, that looks like something Jimmy would wear. That looks like something Sly would wear. That fits. I'm going to wear it. You know what I mean? And it just turned out to be a way that I garnered more social attention in my clique. You know what I mean? And you know what it is. It's like, especially when you're just a young male, moving out into the world, anything that opens up possibilities for you to meet more girls, you're just going to keep fueling that. It's working. Right? And that was part of the thing. Franklin's Mass had a pretty strong female following in these small, out of the way communities. Girls were really liking what we were presenting because of the way that we looked, and their boyfriends not necessarily so much. You know, so that's why we had to bring self defense mechanisms with us and things of that nature. Um, it wasn't because we were just complete droogs, although I was pretty droogy, meaning like from Clockwork Orange.
I know what it means.
You know
Hey,
what I
Drew, you
mean?
don't crash here. Yeah, so you guys, I'm just imagining like you're a mixed band. It's you're Black American, and your homeboy is like half Asian, and then the other guy, total Anglo dude or whatever. And like you guys are dressed all androgynous. That must have looked crazy back then, you know?
Yeah, but I'm telling you, we look cool. You know what I mean? I mean, we look, even by today's standards, if you look back on it, it doesn't look like we didn't know what we were doing. You know what I mean? It wasn't like we weren't so I'll say it this way. We weren't so outrageous that it looked ridiculous in hindsight, right? It was just kind of like, if you look at what other performers were wearing in the 70s,
Rockstar
it was
stuff.
like, yeah, it was like in the realm of that, only filtered through our lens. You know what I'm saying? And we just made a lot of we just like got a lot of attention for standing our ground. You know what I mean? Because there was, certain musicians would kind of look at you side eyed or roll their eyes at you. You know what I mean? Like, what are y'all doing? I remember we were in Dallas one time. Um, and the New York Dolls had just played a set, and we were like backstage kicking it with this other band called the Werewolves, and us and the Werewolves were kind of on the same page, glam wise. And this other cat used to play in this group called Blood Rock, which
Love
was a
Blood Rock.
it was a big
Melvin Laid an Egg is one of my favorite
yeah,
songs.
yeah. John Nitzinger came back there, and he was kind of like, "Man, why you guys got to wear all that makeup and
That's
shit like
funny.
that?" And I had a good buddy named Keith Ferguson, who was bass player for the Fabulous Thunderbirds,
Wow.
which was the band that he had with Jimmy Vaughn, right, Stevie's older brother. And Keith was like actually a glam cat. When I first met Keith, he had just come from San Francisco, and he had several colors of hair dye in his shag, you know what I'm saying? And he had been to England. He was essentially like Johnny Winter's personal assistant. When Johnny was touring Europe, Keith would go to Europe with Johnny because Johnny was visually impaired, right?
Oh wow.
Because he was cross-eyed. If you notice, Johnny's cross-eyed.
I didn't realize
So,
that. I'm so used to looking at his, he's albino and he just has a striking appearance.
Well,
Like,
unlike Edgar, Johnny was cross-eyed, right?
wow.
Yeah. So my point is he's visually impaired, and Keith, was kind of like his right-hand man because they went to high school together, right? So long and short of it, Keith was back there in that little dressing area or whatever, and when John Nitzinger started popping off about why we were doing this, that, and the other thing, he's like, well, mainly because they fucking like it, That's the reason. And then of course I would pop up, and what you gonna do about it? Like, that's what what I'm saying. And I was known for being that guy, right? Like, okay, right? Okay.
It's like, yeah, I'm wearing this nail polish, but I'll still kick your ass.
Yeah, we're gonna squabble. We're gonna get busy. We're gonna get busy with it. But no, man, we weren't. It wasn't like we were, into just trying to intimidate people or anything of that nature.
No,
but
I didn't
people,
think that.
but
I didn't think that at all.
But you got to put it in context, right? It's like back then, people look at you, call you whatever, a faggot or this, that, and the other thing, and those are fighting words for real, let alone the N word, and then you combinate on that, now you're N words and F words, and you know what I'm saying, the whole 9 yards. So what you just gonna roll with that?
No.
No, you got
No.
draw lines in the sand and let them recognize like what time it is. You know what I'm saying? That was kind of
Putting the smack down.
developed over time. So listen, man, I hate to cut you off, but I really do have another appointment at 2. So if we could phase out here and maybe, come back maybe for part 3 at some point.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Because as I said, I got tons of questions.
Yeah. I'd love to.
And then even this whole thing, like I have like other bands I want to talk about. I was wondering if you guys even played with Victoria Vane and the Thunderpunks in Oakland, because they were kind of a glam band too around that time. But you guys were before them.
We never went that far west. We kind of.
I mean, not Oakland. I'm sorry, Oklahoma. My bad.
No, that doesn't even register with me. I wouldn't have even known who that was. But then again, here we go. It was the 70s, and of course there was no internet, and there wasn't a lot of what we call print media that was like following like local movements like that. That's why, we were in the same time and space as like the band Death, but we never knew what was going on with them because they didn't have if you didn't have a record deal, you didn't register on the radar, so to speak, unless you pass them through. But we'll circle back and kick it. You know what I'm saying?
I have a few more about Franklin's I want to ask you, but we'll get back to it, man. Thanks a lot. We'll make it a series if you want, man, because you have a lot. You have a lot.
Let's plan to do that while I'm still able to remember what's going on. You know what I'm saying?
Most definitely, man. Thanks a lot, Bevis, and thanks for your patience. I know this technology is a pain in the NARS, but
Yeah, well, now that if it's got to be like it is, that's fine. I'll just know to log on the phone first, and then we'll see what's going on, because I was literally just trying to log on to the
Yeah,
laptop, and
yeah.
there's no icons on this page. And I'm looking at our conversation now, and I'm looking at a delayed reaction to the conversation that I'm having with you on my laptop. So
I,
it's
I forgot
something
that
to look
it
into.
was the computer. If you have a computer, it's different. But I didn't know that until someone um showed me that before. So like, thanks for your patience. I appreciate it,
All
man.
good, man. I got you and you got me. So let's just put something on the books and we'll try to make it happen while I still have some flexibility. I'm trying to stay pretty flexible through February. And, if you can find another window for me, I'll circle back. Okay.
Most definitely. We'll talk.
All right.
Thanks a lot, Bevis. Always great
All right.
talking to you. And thanks for your encouragements too. You always encourage me. I mean, even off the record, like, this brother always encourages me, you guys. I kid you not.
Oh no,
And
man. Well, like I said, it's a generational handoff. You dig what I mean? And it's like, I mean, I'm not going to be here forever, and if you're in a position to chronicle these things and put these things in historical context, I mean, I can do nothing but respect and love that. You dig? So hats off. I salute you. Okay.
thanks, man.
All right.
Thanks a lot, brother.
In a minute,
Peace.
get back at me. Okay.
Most
Oh, yo, and
definitely.
definitely go check out that Zep flick while it's still
Yeah, I want
in
to
circuit.
check that out. I didn't
Oh,
even know.
it's dope. It is dope. I saw it the other day, and I'm gonna go see it again. It was so dope. What I loved about it was they actually get into the studio strategy, like how they were, like Jimmy Page had game, bro. And
Yeah, man.
get the business aspect of the way that they set up, like they self financed that debut album, so that when they went to Atlantic, because of Jimmy's session work, he already had a relationship with Jerry Wexler.
Hmm.
When they had when he signed on with Peter Grant, who was already managing the Yardbirds, he said, "Okay, well, here's the thing: we're going to own this master, and then we're going to license it to a major label. I want to go to Atlantic first, anyway." But he breaks it all down, and I'm telling you, it's so relevant to the church of what's happening now with like indie music, right? You think about that. It's like if you come in on your own dime, then you can like set your own parameters, and you're not at the mercy of a label telling you how high to jump and when. You dig what I mean? So
Yeah,
deep documentary. You're gonna love it.
yeah, I got to check that out.
And definitely,
Man,
if you can see it in the IMAX, don't sleep on that. See it in IMAX.
word. Well,
All right.
thanks.
All
Thanks a
right.
lot, man.
Bev out. I'll see you in a minute.
Peace, man. Black history of rock and roll. Black history of rock and
Yeah.
roll. Black history of rock and
Yeah.
roll.
Just get back at me on my DMs, and we'll slot something up. All right.
Most definitely.